Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 76 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have a wonderful discussion with Sarah McVanel. Now, Sarah is the owner of a boutique firm called Greatness Magnified, and that stems from a book she had released and a whole course and lifestyle that she teaches called Forever Recognize Others' Greatness. Now, she helps individuals leverage the exponential power of recognition to retain top talent, fuel healthy teams, and sustain healthy bottom lines. Sarah speaks around the world on this topic. She leads workshops, she coaches leaders, and she conducts organizational recognition program reviews. She specializes in working with service-based organizations and helping professionals. She is a certified speaker professional, a CSP, a certified senior organizational development professional, a professional certified coach, a certified human resources leader, and she's also president of the Toronto chapter of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, which is how I am fortunate enough to get to know Sarah. She is our local chapter president and an awesome personality to boost. She recently just launched her latest book, Flip Side of Failing, which is basically looking at failure and basically turning that into greatness and recognizing the strength and power in that. So we'll get to the interview with Sarah in just a moment. But before that, I'm going to share a word from our sponsor and share a personal update. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is an author-centric company that is there to give you the tools that you need to either find a professional narrator for the production of your audiobook, and connect you with those professionals, or if you already have the files yourself, you can use them to distribute your files to retailers and libraries around the world. Now, I have been using Findaway Voices as one of the places to get my audiobooks out into the world, and I am an extremely satisfied customer. I wouldn't have them as a sponsor if I didn't believe in them. One of the things that happened recently with Findaway that I wanted to share was because I have submitted the majority of my titles, I'm using a program that they have called Voices Plus, which means instead of using them as distribution for some of the channels and then, using ACX directly and other retailers directly, the majority of my audiobook titles are in the Voices Plus program. And when you're part of that program, you get invited to special promos. So I recently submitted a promo for one of my titles to be featured in a June promo, which is on a number of retailers, and I haven't found out if I'm in the promo or not, but if I do get in the promo, I'll definitely share details on how that's going. If you're interested in checking out audiobooks and you want to learn more, there are episodes of the podcast where I've interviewed folks from Findaway Voices. I'll include a link to that in the show notes, or you can check them out yourself at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. Now, in terms of a personal update, I'm going to be relatively brief here. If you recall from a previous episode, I was in Oklahoma City, where I spent the week in the Draft to Digital offices. So I flew in on Sunday, May 12th, and I spent all 5 days, the 13th through the 17th, in the Draft to Digital offices, and it was very valuable. Being in person and connecting with my colleagues, because I could just, get up and move over to the next office and have a conversation with Jim, who's the project manager, or pop in and talk to Wayne over in the IT department, or walk over and have a chat with Alexis from customer service as well. So that in person, the ability to just drop in and have a conversation, or even the conversations that you have in the lunchroom, where you're having coffee or you're eating lunch, are extremely valuable. And I often find that's important for writers connecting with other writers at a local library, a local bookstore, whatever conference you can actually try to physically get to. Of course, one of the downsides to being in Oklahoma was when I went to fly out on Sunday morning, because there had been massive storms and potential tornado warnings on the Saturday. My flight got bumped back a few hours, and the connecting flight in Chicago was actually canceled. All of the connecting flights that had space, there was no space anymore. So American Airlines automatically bumped me from the flight on Sunday morning to a flight on Tuesday morning. So American Airlines had to put me up in a hotel near the airport. So I was in Oklahoma for an additional 2 days. Now the Sunday, I was frustrated and upset and a little bit, angry because Monday in Ontario, Canada, Monday was Victoria Day, celebrating Queen Victoria's birthday, which we do in this Commonwealth country. And it's the first, we usually call it the May 2-4 weekend. It's the first long weekend of the summer, and it's usually a kickoff for summer. So I was so looking forward to coming back home Sunday. Actually was going to be meeting up with Liz's youngest daughter, Emily, and her boyfriend, Jeremy, because they were coming back from a trip to Thailand and Vietnam. And I was going to be getting in an hour before them, so it would be great. So instead of anyone having to drive to the airport to pick them up, I was going to come home with them and then find out all the wonderful stories they had to share. So even though they had an extremely longer day of travel ahead of them, I didn't make it. So I didn't get to see them, and I didn't get to spend Monday with Liz on that long weekend. But I did make the best of it because I couldn't control anything, and you can get upset and be frustrated, but at the end of the day, I'm stuck there. There's nothing much I could do. I did look into alternative flights and what the cost might be, but let's be honest, I'm not going to be dropping, tons of money, just to, and half of the flights I looked at would mean I wouldn't even get there at a reasonable time, and I would lose most of Monday anyways, just because of the flight situation. So Sunday in Oklahoma was actually enjoyable. I made the best of it. I explored a different neighborhood I hadn't seen before. I rented one of those electronic scooters, and I went the 7-kilometer hike into closer to the downtown area. I went to a few of the breweries I hadn't had a chance to hang out at yet, because Oklahoma does have an amazing craft beer scene. And so this was basically the day after I went with a couple colleagues from Drafted Digital to the Oklahoma Craft Beer Festival. So you'd thought I might have been beered out, but no, there were still some places to check out. And again, just wandering around, seeing the sights, going to different places to eat. So that was Sunday. Monday, I ended up just going back into the office, Drafted Digital, so that I wasn't just stuck in the hotel room near the airport. But because the weather advisory was so terrifying, there were tornadoes that ended up touching down several miles outside of Oklahoma City, but the schools had shut down. The office was relatively quiet because a lot of folks stayed home because their kids were home from school, so they just worked from home. And then I ended up leaving the office relatively early so I could get into downtown and grab something to eat at one of the restaurants I was familiar with before going back to the hotel. And Bricktown, which is sort of a very highly populated tourist destination. This is where the Oklahoma Thunder play. Their stadium's down there, and there's a lot of activity. And there was a Kids in the Hall concert going on Saturday night down in that area. So very, very populous and touristy place. And when the Uber driver dropped me off downtown, we were driving through Bricktown. It was a ghost city. It actually looked like a post-apocalyptic city. I was waiting for zombies to come around the corner. And when I walked into the one bar there, the Henry Hudson Public House, I believe I was the only customer, the first customer to get there. There were probably half a dozen people that showed up eventually. But I went in there and I was worried because a lot of places were closed down. And so Monday was a little bit quieter. I went back to the hotel room. I binge watched Bosch on Amazon Prime because I don't have access to that when I'm in Canada. So I finally made it into season 5 and a few episodes in, and I'm loving the show. So if you have access to that from the US, it's definitely worth checking out. Titus Reliever is a great actor who really portrays the heart of Bosch in a phenomenal way. And then finally, even though I was delayed getting out the next morning, when I got to the airport on Tuesday morning, and my flight was at 5:40, so as I get to the airport a little after 4 in the morning, the tornado sirens were going off. The Uber driver dropped me off, said, yeah, that's the tornado sirens. So, I'm not used to that. I'm used to snow and other weather conditions, not tornadoes like the locals in Oklahoma are used to. So my flight was delayed going out because of lightning and stuff like that. So I missed my connection in Chicago. Again, took advantage of that. Listened to a fantastic audiobook, Augmented by Brett King. It's a few years old now, but a really interesting look at augmented life in an augmented world, and it was fascinating. And I listened to most of that as I wandered around for 2.5 hours waiting for the next flight I was to connect with in Chicago. Took advantage of getting some steps in and getting some exercise. And even though there were places to have beer at the airport, I decided I was just going to go beer free and do some walking, get some steps in. So I finally did get home Tuesday night, which was great to actually sleep in my own bed and to have dinner at home in a home-cooked setting, and now back to the regular routine. Now, but one of the things that I've been personally frustrated with, and I thought I'd share this because, we go through this as writers, is even though I was in the hotel room and I'd started to get some writing done earlier last week, I didn't get the writing done that I had intended to get done. And that's really frustrating me, but I have to remember not to beat myself up about that, to try to, now that I'm back home and now that I'm into a regular routine, get back into that routine where I get up at 5 in the morning and I spend the first couple hours focusing on writing projects before I kick off and do the other things that I need to do. Work with the authors that I work with, connect with the folks at Draft to Digital, and work on the various projects, which include going to Book Expo America in New York next week. Well, that's it for the personal update segment of the show. I'm dying to share this fantastic interview with Sarah. Let's get right into that. Hey, Sarah, thanks for hanging out with me today.
My pleasure, Faith. Love being here with you.
Of course, Siri, for the second time, every time I say your name, Siri jumps up and says hello. So Siri says hello to you as well, Sarah.
Oh, hey, Siri. How's it going?
I'm so excited to talk to you, particularly about your forthcoming book, but I want to go back first into your history as a writer and as a speaker. Where, Sarah, did it all begin?
That is so funny. You know what? It began because my best favorite colleague decided she was going to retire early. And as I, for the first time ever in my corporate career, burst into tears suddenly, no, you can't leave me. I said, okay, you're allowed to retire early on one condition. We write a book about the journey that we have been on,
Whoa.
this quest to redefine greatness in our workplace, and how we finally found the secret sauce, which for anyone who knows me and is listening because they know me, it's recognition. And we don't talk about that in corporate Canada or corporate America. We minimize it. We don't see how valuable it is. And yet, as organizational development gurus, as we saw ourselves to be, we had gotten better results through leveraging recognition with leaders and teams than any other organizational strategy. So she promised, I think maybe so that I would stop crying, to write the book with me. But we did it. About 6 months after she left, we just, and she had gone off and traveled and had some fun. And I said, so are you ready to start getting some of our experiences, our stories, the hacks and tools that we use down on paper? And we kind of actually started writing 2 books. The one, Forever Recognize Others' Greatness, F.R.O.G, because we're frogsters. So, we frog people randomly, strangers. We go and we tell people, I need to frog you, which, by the way, tell them it stands for Forever Recognize Others' Greatness before they call security. But
you frogged me in Vancouver at the CAPS convention, right?
Because you're freaking awesome. That's why. So yes, nobody is safe from being frogged. Your listeners will be frogged too with their really amazing comments. I hope that they comment and, weigh in on this. So yeah, we started writing about Forever Recognize Others' Greatness and how it's an essential strategy in workplaces today and how people could do it in their own lives, their families, their educational institutions. And we just loved it so much. Then we had already started keying up writing our second book, which is actually a workbook. So all the tools and strategies that we would use. And we thought we would write it maybe in a year or two, to get a break. all your listeners will value that, right? You're exhausted. You feel like you've just birthed this baby and you don't want to jump into the next one. I mean, some people may want to, but we were definitely tired. And we had clients who were saying to us right away, okay, well, that's all well and good for all you who do this all day long to teach us this, but we want the tools in an easy to use toolbox, so to speak. And of course we thought, well, okay, you got to give your clients what they want. And so we put those tools together, and that was book number 2 came 3 months after that. So that's kind of that's the genesis. And it all began with tears, as many books do.
Of course. and tears throughout the whole process often.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, believe me, the hilarious thing about writing that book too was, I was so sick of it by the end of it. I mean, I was super, super proud of it, but I didn't want to, as again, probably many of your listeners can relate, didn't want to actually pick it up and read it for fear of seeing things that mistakes or just thinking like, oh, maybe it wasn't actually good enough. And everybody's just been telling me that they like it because they like me. And so finally I was desperate enough to pick up my own book because I had 5 hours before bedtime and I had forgotten my book when I was away. I'm a speaker, predominantly. And, it's lonely in a hotel room and I didn't want to watch boring drivel on TV. And I picked it up and I went, damn, this is a good book. I would buy this book. This is good. And so I've actually read it and it was really good. So for those of your listeners who haven't actually read their book, go back and read it because it is
after it's all out and everything's done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's love it.
Exciting. So how did you guys approach the co-authoring for the title? How did you divide up the work? How did you keep the project on track?
Such a great question, especially since we were in very different life phases. So here she is, retired. She's living in 3 different parts of the world. She divides her time between the cottage, her main address, and then her Florida home. And then also now her daughter lives in Israel and is having beautiful babies. So it's actually really 4 locations. So we had to find a way, and we don't live in the same place. Even any one of those 4 places is not where I live. So we had to find a technology or a system that allow us to collaborate, keep the project going, and also not have that awkward rework of, oh shoot, I was working on that same thing. And because we really wanted to write from a place of excitement and passion, as opposed to, okay, you must write for chapter 1 first, and then I'll write chapter 2. And that works for some people, but it wasn't really what we wanted to do. So we just open up a Google Doc, and that's how we would do it. Is she would write, and I would write anytime we were vibing with it. I tended to write it more than she did, only because my lifestyle was, I was still working, I was still hustling, I had just launched my own business, and so there were even new colleagues and industries and clients that I had an opportunity to experience this success through new lenses, and I wanted that to be part of the book too. So what we found is, and this is a little hack for those of your listeners who are considering doing collaborative work or are in the process, is, you're not going to have the same voice. We tried so hard to create the same voice, and it's like trying to create a new human being. So it's awkward. So what we decided was the things that we like to write about, we would write about those things. She loves writing stories. My colleague Brenda, I should give her a name, beautiful Brenda Zalter-Minden. Okay. Brenda loves writing stories. She loves throwing in anecdotes. She loves talking about metaphors. So she generally would be the one we'd say, okay, you know what? We probably need a story here. Can you think of one? She'd immediately think of one because she has had this beautiful, long, decorated career. And then I like those things too, and I'm a big storyteller on the stage, but I also really value the data and the evidence and the science behind it, the psychology science, I went to an engagement survey company that I had done a lot of work with, and I said, hey, just waiting, of course, I'm sure all that time for a nosy blonde to come and ask them to do more work. Hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we do a huge analysis of your database and put a whole chapter dedicated to the evidence of recognition, but we'll only use your data set. So I wrote about that because I was the one who approached them. And I really like data, and, I wouldn't want to do it all day long, but I love being able to validate the practical side of what we see. So that's what's a natural fit for me to be writing about that. And I was constantly consuming content in this area. Whereas again, if you're retired, you're not. So I would find new examples and ideas and research and throw that in there and think, yes, chapter 2, we've been looking for a study to back up what we know to be true in this theory, this methodology of thinking in this one area of the world. So, or school of thought, which is the solution focused approach. Here's a recent study that doesn't actually talk about solution focus, but that is an evidence about what they talk about. So that was kind of how we did it. It was very exploratory. It took longer that way. It took us 2 years to write the book. We wrote it basically part-time in our pajamas a lot of the time, but it is worth it. And it is a huge credibility builder. Anyone out there like me who has a corporate bent to their book writing, if you don't have a book yet, honestly, it's how it got me into big brands. Like Home Depot was the first client who hired me because of the book. They saw the book. Somebody was a store manager, saw it on Facebook that, hey, my new books have arrived. And she said, this is exactly what we are all about at Home Depot. Will you come in and do store manager training, which led to assistant store manager, which led to, supervisor training. And now they're, client on my website. So it gives you credibility to get in front of corporate Canada, corporate America. And frankly, it just gives you a launching pad to then be able to build all kinds of other products and services from there. So you have more forms of passive income.
Very cool. Now, you were working a corporate job at the time that you were writing the book, but then you've transitioned to own your own business, to run your own business as a speaker, as a consultant, as an expert on recognition.
Mm-hmm.
How did that process work?
Yeah. So started writing the book as that passion project. And then the reason why I made the leap, I had always planned on working for myself, but I planned to do it when the time was, quote, right, as if there's ever a right time. So no mortgage, or when I retired, or when Venus aligned with, the moon, and I don't know, whatever. It was just it was going to happen one day. And then life throws you curveballs, which always happens. And you're not always ready for it when it happens. My son had been bullied for years, and we thought that it was better, and it wasn't. And I came home one day after working my ridiculously long hours. By this point, I'm a senior leader in a large, very busy community hospital with huge portfolio that I'm responsible for. Missed dinner again, come home. My husband says, Justin something's up. Like, I don't know what it is. He's quiet. He's already in his room. So my normally high energy whirling dervish son, who I just adore for that energy and that enthusiasm, is now in the dark in his room before bedtime. And these are my kids. I have to teach them still at this phase that there is such a thing called bedtime. And yes, it's still happening again today. So I go upstairs and I go in the room and I sit down beside him and I just say, bad day at school today, buddy. And he says, yeah, it was a bad day for Bully's mom. And I look down at his arm because the street light is shining in his room and it's casting this light on his arm. And I notice he's got cut marks up and down his arm. And I think I can't do this. I wrap my arms around him and I tell him I love him and we're going to fix this. Of course, in my mind, I'm feeling like a total failure. And how did I miss this? And the reason why I'm late is I just did this massive mediation with 2 professionals in the workplace. And how did I miss this with my own kid? And how are we going to get out of this situation? Because we're up to our eyeballs in debt. We're, quote, living the dream, which means a lot of mortgage and a lot of obligation. And what my husband and I decided was, besides practicing what we've been writing about in the book, where we needed to recognize each other so much more at home, not take each other for granted, be dialing into each other. So that was actually gave a lot of momentum to the book because we were seeing the success of that. But honestly, Mark, we could not change the school situation so that it was safe for my son. And I knew he'd never be away from this group of kids, which I'm sure were nice human beings on their own, but together they weren't. Right. And there's only one high school where we lived. So he would be with these kids for until the end of high school. And I just couldn't imagine if my son could make it that long. So I quit my job. We sold our house, we sold our cottage, we got out of debt, we moved back to where I'm from, which is the Niagara region. We live in wine country. So, clearly it's a tough life that we live now. And I didn't know quite what I was going to do, other than I didn't even brand myself as a recognition expert. I just said to everybody that I knew and that I had some credibility with, hey, guess what? I'm available. What do you want to do together? And that was the start of the business. And then within a year of launching it was when I niched into recognition. Kind of obvious. I should probably, to all your listeners, it's like, well, why, if you're writing a book on recognition, why wouldn't you niche into that spot? So sometimes the most obvious things are staring us in the face. But the great news is my son got better and my daughter's thriving too right away. My son, my husband, although he has a longer commute, he's super happy. He's channeled his inner Mike Holmes as we bought this super dilapidated house. So he's constantly wearing a tool belt, which makes him feel super manly. So, whatever you got to do. And I absolutely am over the moon in love with what I do and have never realized. I mean, I published a lot of academic papers because I thought, again, that was part of my dream around climbing the ladder, was I thought that was what gave me credibility. But shifting to writing books that could be consumed by people on a much more broad scale than that gives me such joy. It's way more enjoyable than writing academically. There's a lot less rejection too, thank God, because there's enough of that in speaking. I joke with my husband, I get rejected more from speaking gigs than I ever got rejected dating, but he doesn't really like me talking about dating anyway. Sorry, too much information. But in all seriousness though, I just love hearing people reach out to me sharing, I so needed this book right now, or this has helped transform a workplace. I mean, I just got an order from somebody who had read the book, somebody had lent it to them, and they decided to commit the entire conference to frogging. And so they bought books and workbooks and squishy frogs and frog charms and all kudos cards and all the things that I have available. Every single thing in my store on my website, they bought enough for every person who's coming to this HR conference that they're hosting in their organization. That feeds my soul. That and my family feed my soul more than anything you could possibly imagine. So I just love that a book has been able to create security for my family, and and the whole brand that's built around it has built financial and emotional stability for my family, and that it then has sparked hope and joy and feeling valued in this incredibly fast-paced, stressful world of work today. So yeah, I'm a bit addicted to writing now. I have to say, it's a good addiction. It's healthy. I don't think I'm going to need rehab or anything. But
It's a dangerous addiction, but it's not a bad one where addictions go.
Yeah, you're pretty addicted too. You've only dedicated your entire career to the publishing.
So you've got, speaking of books and being addicted to it, you have a book that is about to be released called The Flip Side of Failing.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a lot of failure in publishing and writing. There's a lot of rejection. Unlike you, I was never lucky with the dating scene. So I was getting rejected in writing and in my personal life. So I got a really thick skin from it. So there was a good benefit.
Good for you. You don't need my book then.
But tell me about Flip Side of Failing. Let's talk about this, because I think this is going to be very pertinent to the listeners of the show, because we're all used to that, at least that fear of failure.
Yeah. And so many people are, right? So there's, whether it's FEMO, fear of missing out, or fear of rejection, or for some of your listeners, they may, as I'm talking about speaking, they may think, oh, I wish I could speak because that would help sell my books, or because I think my message is a bigger audience, but they're afraid of speaking. So there's lots of fear of failure and various things around that. But interestingly though, as maybe again, your listeners can relate, I didn't actually plan to write a book on failure. It seems kind of counter-brand. Okay. Would you agree?
Yeah. Greatness, failure. Okay.
Like, wow, that seems like a natural fit, But what I decided to do, because my brand is F.R.O.G, forever recognize that there's greatness, I thought the G needs some more play. We need there's other books on greatness, but I feel like there's more conversation we can be having around that. And I decided the way I was going to do that is interviewing amazing Canadians. And you and I are both Canadians, so we want more books about Canadians and Canadian organizations. And so I thought that would sort of check. That's one of my things, being very patriotic. God love Google, but I don't need to write another book about it. Just saying, And so I started interviewing all of these, and actually I had a team around me of HR and human resource interns who helped me out with that, interviewing, World Hall of Fame speakers, 3M scholars, Olympians, Paralympians, people like folks will on this podcast will know Peter Mansbridge, award-winning journalist. So he's in the book. And what I thought would be the book would be every chapter would be another element of greatness. And then I would teach those lessons through the lens of these great Canadians. Well, as often happens in book writing processes, you don't end up writing the book you plan to write because there was such a disparity, like a range of really juicy themes, but they just didn't pull together in this really easy to digest. It just seemed like it was going to be another chicken soup for the soul. And anybody who loves those books, no bashing it or anything. It's just, there are about 300 versions of it. We don't need another one of those. So what I after two quote failed attempts, when I say quote failed, because it actually was leading to the best possible book, I realized that the only theme that came up in every single interview was how invaluable failure was. And it just went, yes, this is the greatness conversation we need to have, that you can fail and still be great. Greatness, as I define greatness, being your talents, passions, and virtues that allow you to elevate your true potential. So imagine if we could honor our own talents, passions, and virtues despite failing, and that actually it was helping us to achieve our potential rather than roadblocking it the way most of us think of it. I mean, that's the dictionary definition, is lack of success is the dictionary definition of failure. But as your authors on the line will know, it's the failed attempts in writing or the first 15,000 words where you're trying to find your voice that actually you can't use, but then you find the most amazing, juicy voice that's way better than if you had forced yourself to stick with that first 1,500 words or 1,000 words or whatever. And so that's what the book is about, is teaching people that your greatness actually is by accepting failure. And so for folks who may benefit from this, the model that I created as a result of reading between the lines of these interviews was that we have to have a failure-friendly mindset. We have to be in a context that accepts failure. And then when a failure happens, our failure-friendly or failure-resilient mindset and the context that allows us to fail allows us to then elevate from failure, as opposed to the alternative, which is to deflate from it or just mitigate the damage. I mean, who has written the best book imaginable when you're just trying to tolerate your circumstance, whether it be tolerate your relationship circumstance that doesn't support your writing, or you're in a really miserable job and you're trying to squeeze it in. And, so I'm sure lots of folks can kind of relate to that model. But when it comes to the mindset piece of the book specifically, ACCEPT actually stands for, it's an acronym. And for those of you who write business books, you'll probably get how powerful acronyms are, because it just helps your reader remember these things. So the A of ACCEPT is acquire. So what lessons can be learned? C is choice. What options are available? The next C is connection. So how does this actually bond us and unite us through this failure? E is expect. How could this be expected? P is progress. What's the best way forward? And T is transformation. What is important long term? So for anyone who's listening to this, who's feeling frustrated that they're failing in their book, or it's not selling the way they'd like it to, or that they thought that if they invested all this money in an editor or a big publishing contract and the person's not writing it the way that they would want, my suggestion to you on behalf of these 30 plus amazing Canadians is that actually that's probably leading to your success. It's just something that you get to discover still. And if instead you're failure resistant and you're in that sort of accuse mode, like who needs to answer to this, and what's people are doing this wrong, or how are people letting me down, or how was I so foolish, or what am I doing wrong, or what's wrong with me, or maybe I don't have a book in me, or maybe I don't have a big enough name for anybody to buy my book. That's probably not going to help you in your writing. It's not going to help you with your marketing. It's not going to help you in life. So, accepting, as you said, Mark, that if you can, given that all authors experience failure at some point, accepting it allows you then to harness the genius or the great stuff that can come from that failure.
That's fantastic. So now that we've got people primed, when is
Mm.
this book going to be available to the market so people can check it
Mm.
out?
Okay, well, this is actually kind of a cool story that some people maybe find really helpful. Again, folks who are in the corporate market or who do speaking. So I went out to an amazing client who has this fabulous conference, Spark Women's Leadership Conference, and I said, "Hey, I've got a book coming out. I know you're trying to decide on your speakers. If you want to launch the book at your conference, I will hold off launching it until Spark." And so they thought that was amazing. They don't normally have people come back, but I've the good fortune of the 6 years they've been running this conference. I've spoken at it 3 times. And so they are the first ones to get the keynote that goes with the book as well as the book. And the sponsor loved it so much. The person who sponsored me in the past and sponsoring me again, she said, "Oh, I would love for everybody to have a copy of the book." So she then bought a copy for everybody, which again helps with really getting your book sales off the ground. So the book is available to them. So make it exclusive. Give somebody who can get, that's 300 copies. So it's not
Yeah.
a bad way to start. And so 300 copies are going to be available to that conference alone on the 16th of May. And then the rest of the world is welcome to enjoy it on the 21st of May. And then I spend a good portion of my weekdays in the studio filming or recording the audio version of the book in June. And so the audio version will be available in June 2019.
Oh, that is exciting. I love that concept of, I mean, a lot of authors are looking at, okay, I'm launching my book. What am I going to do? Am I going to have an event?
Mhm.
Am I going to have some people in the audience? Is anyone going to show up to the bookstore/library event? You've already got 300 people in a room where you're speaking and they get the book. So
Yes,
you're getting the best of both worlds. Like, I'll just bam.
exactly.
And
Exactly. And
you're
I get
giving the
paid to
conference
speak
an
too.
exclusive too, which is exciting too.
And most people want to, if they want to be part of something new and exciting. So your book, if you believe, everyone, that your book is new and exciting and fabulous and that people are going to love it, then you're going to show up differently. You're going to show up and say, "Hey, guess what? You've got a great, super cool thing that you can do to help promote your event or your conference or your seminar series, whatever, whoever it is that you're approaching." And they saw it as a huge win for them. In fact, so much so, they love the concept so much. They love the fact that they're exclusive. They've decided that they're going to add a failure panel in the afternoon. And so I'm going to be the panel moderator. And I thought, this is cool. So now when I'm going to bundle this and make this available to other conferences, it's going to be, you get a keynote session, you get a moderated panel, and you get one of the options will be an audiobook for everybody in the audience, or of course a print version too. But the way I do this, and here's a little hack for those of you who are listening who are speakers or who are thinking about becoming speakers or trainers even, I use something called sweet spot pricing by Lori Guest. She's a member of NSA, National Speakers Association in the US. And you give your clients 3 options. And even those of you who aren't getting paid to do this and you want to offer it as an exclusive at an event, maybe the first option is, I'm going to come, I'm going to do, you're going to have custom branding and we're going to make the event exclusive, book signing, whatever. And then the option number 2 is, you can purchase a copy for everybody in the audience, or it comes with my fee, a small fee to do a special thing. And then the third option is your most expensive option. It's usually fairly different than your option 1 and 2. But I'll tell you, I have been surprised by people saying that they only have a certain budget for books or only have a certain budget for materials or for a speaker. And then they will find money in other budget areas because they want the extra value that they can get. So a question that people can ask is, how long would you like this message to last? Jane Atkinson, who's my speaker coach, she suggests that we use this, keying people up is, most people who are interested in your book want some sustainability. They want something from it. And even those of you who are writing fiction, what emotions would you like people to have, or what curiosity, or what, for those of you who write self-help books, what actions do you want people to take as a result of this book? So there's ways that you can engage with people to get them thinking about these really juicy possibilities for people who are going to be in the room with you. And if there's one thing I've learned from trying to host my own events, and this is outside of doing a book launch, because I've actually never done a book launch before. It's unless you call posting things to Facebook and saying I'm excited about stuff a launch, but I'm pretty sure that doesn't constitute as an official launch, which is why I am so thrilled, Mark, that I've retained you for this next book to help me launch it, because you are a rock star at this stuff. I just haven't known how to do it. So by the way, guys, if you're struggling, you need to reach out to Mark and ask him about, he's got this really, really amazing services. And I just say that because I have huge, huge respect for you, my friend. So, but you know, as do everybody in our speaking community, Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. So anyway, I digress. What I would say is anytime you try to offer your own thing, it's going to distract you from your other work that you're doing. And that could be writing if you're a full-time writer, or speaking, or training, or raising your family, or, you know, becoming a muscly, you know, super fit person, or whatever, you know, your things are in your life. Trying to create an event from scratch is a lot of work. And sure, we've got things like Eventbrite, and somebody is willing to lend you their community center, but you still got to decorate it. You still got to fill the room. You're still going to be up in the middle of the night worried that what happens if 3 people show up, or this is going to be so embarrassing if my former boss comes and nobody else. It's just me and him just eyeballing each other over thousands of crudité. You know, don't launch it yourself if you don't have to. Combine it, or find other authors and do something together, and then you all agree we're all going to bring 30 people. Then at least we'll have 100 people in this restaurant, you know. So, or that's creative math, but you know what I'm saying. It's way easier to attach it to something that's happening. And most people don't want to walk by a table in a chapters where somebody's staring at them. It just makes everybody feel super awkward. And also people don't like lines. So even if you get tons of people showing up, nobody wants to stand in your line unless you're like, you know, just won a medal, or, you know, you're a famous, I'm not even going to say Maple Leafs player, because that would have worked last week. But, you know, somebody who just won something. I don't know. That's terrible. I shouldn't joke like that. My husband's a Leaf fan, so
yeah, be careful.
Careful. I know. I joke
maybe you're the guy who wrote Game of Thrones and the new season just started. Maybe
right,
for that. Yeah.
right. Yeah. See, that's what I'm talking about, right? So yeah, the Game of Thrones guy that people are going to line up for, but they're also going to be annoyed lining up too. So you know, make it fun. I would way rather be attached to an event where if you'd have 300 people lining up, why don't you speak for them for 300 people about something that they're going to get from the book, and then they're all enjoying being there for an hour, as opposed to standing in line checking their Instagram for an hour.
Fair enough. Well, Sarah, so much inspiration and information here. I'm pretty excited. I can't wait to read the book. I'm sure my listeners can't. Where can people find out more about you, your awesome business, and obviously this new forthcoming book?
Mm-hmm. My website is greatnessmagnified.com. So love anyone to come and reach out to me through the Contact Sarah page. I do, my assistant responds when I'm not, you know, when I'm traveling in a way, but I try to be the one who responds to almost everything. I, of course, am on all the different forms of social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So folks are welcome to search Sarah McVanel, McVanel for me. And I'm super responsive, super involved in that. And for people who are looking to expand and build their business, I have a flash briefing, actually, for those who are on Amazon Alexa, who have an Alexa device or the app. I have 2 flash briefings. One is, of course, Forever Recognize Others' Greatness. The other one's called Greatness Biz, because a little side passion project has also been supporting entrepreneurs make the leap or to grow, because just sort of the things that I've been able to do in the last 4 years. And so, you know, some people may find that really valuable to tune in for that 1-2 minute hack a day on those 2 topics. So would love for your listeners to tune in there too.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm sure there are people listening on their Alexa device right now. Thank
you. True. I love it.
Exactly.
# love Alexa. Yes.
So thank you, Sarah, so much for hanging out with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
So many great things from that conversation with Sarah, but there's 2 specific things that I wanted to reflect on after that discussion. The first was Sarah's general overall perspective and the greatness that she brings into the world. And that is the importance of recognizing the greatness in others. Now, the new book she was talking about was recognizing the greatness in failures and how, acclimatizing yourself to accepting failure and being in the right mindset to use that to leverage yourself to greatness is so amazing. But I just wanted to pause to reflect on what that does, both personally, when you are spending time and energy on elevating others and recognizing the great things that other people do. You're making the world a better place, and you're probably streamlining your own ability to see greatness in yourself. I mentioned earlier I was frustrated that I didn't get as much writing done as I wanted to do while I was stuck in a hotel room. But, we can be hard on ourselves, but sometimes it's easier to be easier on other people and then cut yourself some slack. So I think about how negative the world is and how we're always in opposition to people. I hate what happened with season 8 of Game of Thrones. I love what happened, and we're going to fight over this, or we're going to fight over the what happened in the latest Avengers movie, or we're going to fight over the latest thing that's going on in politics because we come at it from different perspectives. And we spend so much time putting down other people or looking at different perspectives in a negative way. I love this focus on taking a moment, even if it's a very quick moment, to recognize something great about something people have done for you and going with it. So I'm going to pause here and say, I recognize the fact that even though I probably haven't spoken to you, you are listening to this podcast now, and I recognize that, and I value that you've taken the time to listen to this when there are so many other things you can do. We may never have a chance to talk about it, but please know that I recognize and I respect you for that, and I appreciate that. I'm going to do my best to try to pause to recognize the important things that are valued. I'll use an example. I was in the hotel room last week, and I was at the Grand Hyatt in Bricktown in Oklahoma City, and there was a great breakfast spread every morning, amazing spread. And I was just in the process of getting my coffee and putting stuff down the table, and I overheard a businessman who came over to the woman who was tidying up the dishes and cleaning, and he paused and he shook her hand and he said, "I wanted to thank you. You guys do such an amazing job putting out a great breakfast. I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you." And that probably made her feel really good, and it probably made him feel really good, and it made me feel really good. So taking the time to recognize the greatness of others, no matter how little that moment is really important. And that's something I wanted to reflect on. The other thing I wanted to reflect on was Sarah had made a comment about how she didn't expect on writing a book about failure. She wanted to, showcase some great Canadian leaders and people who inspired her. And she said, you don't always write the book you plan to write. Now, because I'm a pantser, because I don't outline the fiction titles, I just have sort of a vague idea of where I'm going and what the main heart of the conflict is that my character has to resolve. And as I'm writing it, I'm a discovery writer. So as I write it, I discover those things. Now, sometimes I know the ending, but I'm not sure how my character is going to find their way to that ending. And sometimes the character changes the ending on me. So I think it's really, really true. Whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, you don't write the book you plan to write. For example, last year around this time, I was in the throes of putting together a book called Indie Publishing Insider Secrets. And over the course of the summer, I squirreled myself away with my son. We went to get away to do some treetop trekking and zip lining. And during the early morning hours and evening hours, when he was sleeping, I was basically working on the book. And it was 2 chapters from this initial book that turned into their own books. So again, it was a chapter that was going to be It was initially supposed to be the 3 Ps of publishing success: patience, practice, and persistence. And it turned into the 7 Ps, which became originally like a 20,000 word chapter that I cut down to about 16,000 words for what became a book on its own. And then the chapter on Kobo became an entire book. I cut it down to about 30,000 words. But as I was passing 25,000 words, madly scrambling to finish the chapter and realizing I was barely halfway done, all the things I wanted to say, and that became its own book. So again, you don't always write the book you plan to write, but sometimes you write the book that you needed to write, or that the character wanted you to write. So just 2 of some amazing things that this conversation with Sarah has led me to reflect on. And as we're getting to a close to this episode of the Stark Reflections podcast, I want to thank you, the listener, for listening to the podcast. I also want to thank the patrons of the show who support this podcast via patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you guys so much for contributing, whether it's $1 a month or whether you're contributing at the higher levels. I really do appreciate the fact that you're putting your credit card against that and telling me that you believe in the show enough to want to support it. And just to let you guys know, I put out the latest special Patreon only edition of the podcast this morning before I started recording this part of the podcast. And what it was I had done a session with Simon Fraser University where I do a guest virtual lecture. I'm not always there in person. I was only there in person once when I happened to be in town at the right time. But I do a virtual talk, about a 40-45 minute talk followed by a Q&A for their publishing class. And I usually talk about digital publishing and ebook publishing. And I just want to make sure that the people going through this course who are, educated through the course in creative writing and in sort of traditional publishing business, I want to make sure that they understand the opportunity that exists in digital. So I'd done this presentation, and one of the students, I always invite, if you have any questions, please email me. Here's my contact information. So this morning, one of the students had contacted me and asked 4 really great questions. And so what I thought I'd do is I responded to her and I sent the questions off, but I thought there's so much information there, particularly for beginning writers, that I thought I would record my responses in audio so that patrons of the show could benefit from that should they find that info helpful. So that's my way of thanking you for supporting the show with that extra content. But again, thank all listeners for listening to the show. Speaking of listening, if you listen carefully, in this episode, early in my introduction, I talked about the Kids in the Hall being in Oklahoma at the stadium. It was not the Kids in the Hall. The Kids in the Hall were an amazing comedy troupe from Canada. Lorne Michael, the producer of Saturday Night Live, is the producer of Kids in the Hall, and they've since moved on, but they were amazing. They were kind of like a combination between Monty Python and maybe a little bit of SNL and just some strangeness. Just amazing comedy troupe, and I have seen them live on stage. But it was new kids on the block, and I sometimes do that. I have these verbal diarrhea moments where the wrong thing comes out, like a fart that you just can't trust. And I was listening back to a few episodes ago. I was talking about Alicia Witt, and I said, and she's in these great Christmas Harlequin romance movies. And of course, because I've been in the book industry since the early 90s, when I think of romance, I think of Harlequin, but it was Hallmark. Alicia Witt has been in Hallmark Christmas romantic comedies. Not Harlequin, but you can probably see and understand how this book nerd confused the two things that start with HAL. So, again, nobody called me on that, and thanks, guys, I appreciate that. But go ahead, feel free to call me on that, because I will mess up, I will say the wrong thing, and I'm perfectly fine with recognizing that I made a mistake, because that's one of the ways that we learn. Right? I learned that from Sarah as well. I just bought the book from Kobo because it came out this week. And because I'm a slow reader and I'm a little bit behind in my reading, I haven't yet started to read it, but I am so looking forward to digging into it. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Sarah. Hope you enjoyed the reflections. I hope you enjoyed episode 76. Thanks for being here with me this week. I look forward to seeing you next week in episode 77. So until then, here's wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.